Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman with Elisa Marie and Joji. Today we're going to be talking about something that feels real timely for me, or feels real to me, however you want to hear that, because something happened recently that I would say triggered me into a situation that I've been sitting with, and I reached out to Alyssa and some of my other mentors and friends to just run situations by them and say, okay, help me understand what's going on with me. And so basically what it is, I think I've mentioned this in previous episodes, that I'm a pretty career focused person, and the ultimate goal for me in my life in my career was to end my career with being an executive, COO, something like that. And everything I've done in my career has moved me in that direction. And then probably about 10 years ago, maybe, I decided that for my personal life and my marriage and things like that, I felt like I needed to come up with maybe another goal, something that wasn't as all encompassing, all time consuming for a variety of different reasons. And one of the things that I've noticed is that I can easily spiral out into a downward spiral into negativity when I see some of the people that I've known in my past jobs or people that I've crossed paths with one way or another, when they get promoted into an executive role. I end up feeling pretty sad. Maybe some green eyes come out of me and I'm jealous. And I sit in a place of regret about, should I have made a different decision? Is this the right decision for me? Have I let myself down? And things like that. And I start to extensively ruminate about that and start to second guess myself. And for all the things we talk about when you're not living in the present and when you live in the past, it is mentally draining and exhausting to be in that place. And so I will say that was all true for me as this conversation was going on in my head with pros, cons, all this different feedback that I was giving. And ultimately, one of the things that I know works for me to interrupt that pattern is to reach out to people and share where I'm at and get some feedback and get some mentoring. And usually that will at least disrupt my pattern enough so that I don't continue cycling downwards. Given the fact that I think Alyssa and I are both vulnerable on this podcast, I thought to myself, who else better to talk to than Alyssa? And so I contacted her and I said, hey, this is an idea that I have for a talk. It's deeply personal to me, a little bit vulnerable place to be, because I am basically unearthing some things and really laying myself out there open for this conversation of what is the difference between regret and disappointment? How do you move from making a decision into acceptance, and so that you are feeling good about the decision you made? And if you're truly in acceptance, do you never regret maybe a path not taken or something that you went in a different direction? And what does true acceptance feel like? And is that always the way it's going to be? Are you forever going to be like, yeah, I'm good with that decision? Or does everybody maybe go back and forth, not get stuck as long as I did this time, but like at least think about it, what could have been like, and either to evaluate whether that was the right decision or just to know that was one of your goals. And don't get me wrong, I'm very happy for my colleagues that get promoted and are on that path. And I know that these individuals have worked hard and they have been moving in that direction pretty intentionally. And so I take nothing away from their accomplishment. And maybe that's where I also feel a certain amount of guilt, because I like to be happy for everybody. And so if I end up sitting in regret or wallowing in my own self-pity, do I actually take something away from that abundance that I believe in and feeling like everybody can be successful? It doesn't take anything away from me. Though when I sit there, I feel like, are you really happy for them? Or are you not as a good person as you think you are? And then it just is really attacking me from all different sides. And I'm going to bring in Alyssa to this conversation. And I told her that there's no plan for this conversation. I'm happy to go with her on this journey wherever she wants to direct this conversation. So, Alyssa, what do you think about my what feels like rambling at this point?
So obviously we talked about beforehand before we started recording, but I think as I'm sitting here and listening to you, so my initial reaction was like, I don't know, nothing comes readily to mind. But I think hopefully for our listeners, they had the same experience that I did in that as you were describing it, I was like, yeah, no, I've been there. And so I think this is a universal experience. I think this is something that a lot of people do. Well, I think everyone probably experiences it one way or another. And so I was comparing myself to those around me and how does that feel? And I think that it sinks in or it occurs, but something that you talked about a little bit, it lingers for some people and for some it doesn't. And that's what the crux of this conversation circles around. Because I think that's hard. It's sometimes hard to know, is this going to I think what you had said before we got on was like, is this going to be something that continues for a long period of time? Should I just accept it, or is it something? Am I really regretting circumstance? And so, what is the right choices? And I think that everybody can relate to that. When you have these difficult situations that come up, when you have circumstances where you're not sure you're at a fork in the road and you're not sure which direction to go, I think that that is life. Life results in you having to make a choice in a lot of different circumstances. And I think that because of that, there are moments where we think, did I do the right thing? And I know for me, specifically in that particular conversation, I think that does sink in from time to time, but I'm very quick to counteract that and just say, nope, you made the right decision, move on. I don't know if it's just like a mindset or if it's the fact that I've told myself, no, you're doing what you need to do. There's some days where I have a really stressful day and I'm just like, oh, I am in the wrong field. I should have gone into something else. And then whatever that something else, I'm like, nah, that probably wouldn't be a good fit for me. It comes and goes, but it's definitely something that I'm able to move past very quickly because I don't want to sit in that because like you were saying, it's hard to do that.
Yeah, I think that it is mentally exhausting, and that's where I was at the time because before I reached out to my group of people that I reach out to when I have situations like this. And it is something, and I will say my panel of advisors, as I call them, was actually something that I read about in a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it's a very small book and it really talked about like toxic people in your life and how they don't help you. And then the other thing they talked about was like everybody should have a panel of advisors. And these are individuals who are not your friends necessarily, but people who can give you objective feedback for whatever you're going through. And I make that distinction because typically when we talk to our friends, they want to support us and that's what they think that their primary role is in our life. And so I have created a bunch of people in my life that are on this panel that you are a mentor to me, have known my career for a long time, have known me in different periods of my life. And I know that are going to shoot straight with me, not people who are going to sugarcoat something or try to make me feel good, but either get me back on the road and help me move forward. And immediately when I reached out to three people almost immediately. And all three of them were like, you know what, very reassuring, but also, what do you need to do? What do you need from me? What do you need to do to get past this? And also really shared what Alyssa just said, which is that all of us go through this in some form or fashion because all of us have at crossroads in your life at some point, and you always have to decide one or the other. And one of the things that Alyssa had said to me before we jumped on this call was, is this really about the grass is always greener? And there are individuals, and we all know them, that always think about what if and whether we call it the path less traveled or whether we say, the grass is always greener. And I heard this really interesting second line to that phrase, and that is the grass is always greener where you water it. And so this sort of opposite thing of dreaming about what could lie on the other side and realizing that whether it's your marital situation, whether it's individual growth and development, whether it's your career, whether it's investing in another person, that the grass is only greener where you give attention to it. And anytime that we spend thinking about, dreaming about what it could have been like is really not a good use of time because you're not actively doing anything to improve it. And a couple tidbits that come to mind as I talk to my panel of advisors and helping me think through this situation. And they were very supportive to me and helped me think about, okay, what could you do? Because I think the biggest thing that I go round and round about is this regret or how do I move to acceptance? Because I don't want to be here. I feel like I've made the decisions, some of the choices and the time that I have left to do something and accelerate my career is really plateaued out. This is not the place in my time in my life that I'm gonna get really aggressive about my career and start moving. I think that ship has sailed. And so how do I lessen that regret? And what does that look like? And how do I get there? Well, listen, what thoughts do you have for me in terms of knowing the difference between regret and acceptance? And like, how do you get from point A to point B so that you don't spend time worrying about something that is now out of your control?
I have to pause because I was over here, oh, what a great phrase to say, the grass is greener where you water it. Like I think that's an amazing kind of visual for me. I'm a very visual person, and so I'm thinking about that's such a good way of looking at it, that if you foster the life that you have or the things around you, that, that's the goal. And so I think when we jumped on it, I said, I don't know that I have any answers, and I am still sitting here. I don't know specifically, but I do think that one of the things, I think, like faith life comes in. That's one thing that makes me think of when there's people talk about like having a higher power. In some ways that eases it because it's okay. This is not my plan. Each step that I take is part of a bigger plan. And so I think for individuals who have that faith or belief system, that's helpful. I think for other people, we're all doing the best that we can. And so from that mentality or standpoint, if I'm doing the best that I can, and going at fate or that things happen for a reason. I think all of these phrases came about as a way for us to be able to say, I'm just taking one step in front of the other. And as long as I keep putting one step and one foot down and the next, you're moving in a particular trajectory, but we don't ever know where that's going to take us. I think that it's hard. It's very hard to accept when we've had a visual or a plan for where you thought you were going to go and then that shift changes. I know that just recently my students were finishing up that I supervise, and one of them was talking about going into the FBI. So this recently happened within the last week. And I'm listening to her talk about, this is my goal. I want to go to the federal government and FBI. And I'm like, oh yeah, I was right there. My life took a different path though, but it didn't have that same effect that it maybe would have had 5 years ago, because it was about 5 years ago when I realized I'm missing, this is the year. My 35th birthday was the year that I made peace with that. And I think it was because I knew I'm not going that direction. There is not 5 years later when somebody makes mention of it, I'm like, oh, I wonder what that would have been like. But then where's my life been in the last almost 40 years? There's so much that I have accomplished. And so I think that the other part of it is looking at the things that you have accomplished, the goals that you have made, and really recognizing. I think that sometimes we shortchange ourselves and we don't necessarily acknowledge all the work that we have done, because I think that's something that we take for granted sometimes, where it always takes me back to decluttering and organizing because that is just at the forefront of my mind. But I was listening to this woman on a podcast and she was talking about, instead of having a to-do list, have a list of like things I have done, and look, like, instead of saying these are the things I need to get done and crossing them off, having a list that shows what you did do that day, and the realization that I have accomplished so much more than I set out to do. So I think that's something that we don't always recognize because we don't always give ourselves that acknowledgement that I've accomplished a lot, that I've gotten here through a lot of great choices and steps that I didn't even really recognize. So I think those are a couple of ways that I think people hear. I don't know if that kind of encompasses. I think the last thing that I said to you was that there's also always somebody ahead of us and always somebody behind us. And knowing that also helps me get through my day because I've learned so much. And so I'm coming along and coming into my own, but also there's somebody behind me who's going to look at me and say, wow, she's doing all these things that I hope to do someday. And there's somebody who's far ahead of me, maybe further in their career, like you were saying, somebody who's accomplished more in a lot of ways. But I think that's one way of looking at it as well.
Yeah, and as you were talking, and thank you for sharing the 2 things that you mentioned, faith and also remembering what people behind you and in front of you, because I do think that, and also the 3rd thing you said, which is to take an inventory of what you have accomplished, because I think that when you create that kind of a list, you can't minimize what you have accomplished, right? Because when you're in a negative place, you feel like, gosh, I haven't done anything with my life. Like you go to the ultimate negative place where we know that's not true. We've all had variety of goals and we've hit some of them, changed some of them, and ultimately we have continued growing. Otherwise, we would have different issues to deal with. And so I do appreciate those 3 things. And maybe for an exercise, I will actually write down everything I accomplished. Because even as you were saying that, I thought to myself, I didn't think I'd ever do this. I never thought I would do this. And so already I was like, yeah, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I mean, there are things that I've done that I'm very proud of. And 25 years ago, I never thought I would have done or been able to accomplish. And so that I think helps balance that scale a little bit. And instead of just being so like negative, I think it does help. The other thing I wanted to share was that one of my advisors, shout out to my advisor, Sam, and he's much younger than I am, but he's somebody I mentored 2 jobs ago. And I reached out to him because he's so similar to me. And so a couple of the things that he said to me is remember that everybody's path is different and what matters most is finding peace with your decisions. And then the one thing he challenged me on is because he and I are both sort of high strung and achievement oriented, he said, do you feel like you're coasting? And do you feel bad about that because you're content? And is that something because you're a high achiever? High achievers need like constant success. And interestingly enough, like my how do I say this? Job plan was always like a 5-year increment. Like I thought, okay, every 5 years I'm going to change jobs because really I would get bored after 5 years. And so I would always need something different to work on. And usually that happened within the same organization I worked in. And when you work for a large organization, that's easier to do than when you work for a small company like I do now. And he said, I would list out your goals and successes and focus on that. So similar to what you said, Alyssa, and then maybe get comfortable with the fact that maybe it's a sign that I might be ready for a different challenge in my job. And that is something that I don't want to know. And I don't want to hear that. But that might be something that I find myself limited because I've said, no, I don't want to change jobs. This is where I'm going to be forever until I retire. And that is so opposite who I typically have been for my career that maybe that's creating just some incongruence or something like that. The other thing that he also said, and he's such a polite guy, that he says, I want to ask you a question, but I don't want you to take it the wrong way. And he said, are you truly happy or are you pleasing others at the expense of your happiness? And he went on to say, we love the people in our life so much that sometimes we give up on ourselves. And then he said, pay attention to signs of exhaustion. For example, are you still tired when you wake up? Are you sure you're getting a good night's sleep? Are you doing everything you need to physically take care of your body and your mind? And then he said that he's reading a book right now called The Happiness Advantage. And this is a book he sent me. The author is Sean, I think it's pronounced Achor, Achor. And he said that he's in a similar place right now. And he's also weighing out what does he have now and what does he want and how does happiness and our definition of happiness play into that. So I'm interested to look into this book and find out because you and I, Alyssa, we've talked about burnout and just overextending ourselves. And as women, as moms, and as the person who takes care of business in the household, that's a role that we commonly find ourselves in. And so we're overextended when other people in our lives are conserving their energy and then we're like running on empty. So I found his feedback very interesting. And so wanted to know if you had any thoughts about what he shared with me.
I would say everyone should have a Sam
Yes, right.
in their life because that's great feedback in so many ways. And I think that he asked some of those poignant questions that I think that we have to ask ourselves, especially when we're concerned about the potential, like you said, of the regret of, am I doing everything that I wanted to accomplish? Am I on the path that I want to be on, or should I be changing my path? And I think that's such a, it's a soul searching almost endeavor. And you know, I told you earlier, like I'm a problem solver and I'm like, okay, give me a problem. I'll try to figure out a solution to it. But I think that I was having a conversation with somebody similarly that was asking me about like, when is a good time to have kids? And I was like, that is a great question and not something that anyone can answer for you. There are questions in our lives that no one but you and potentially your spouse or partner can answer. There's just no way to know. And you have to just, again, make a decision, not knowing if that's going to be the best decision, but it's going to be the best that you came up in that moment. Those are the thoughts that I came up initially, but I think that it's a really good path to have somebody there that is saying, what are you really happy, or are you pleasing other people? I think it's such a hard question because it requires us to really sit down and really reflect on where are we at in life? What is going on? How do we look at everything in a very metacognitive way and figure out a solution or a plan for us? And so it probably leaves you with a lot more questions than answers, but it's something that, again, it's something that only you can answer. And I think that at the end of the day, whatever decision you make, again, it's going to be the best one for that moment. And when it comes to careers, the nice thing is that usually you can take a step back, look at everything, and then go for what you want. But that can be, I think for me, one of the things that has held me in a lot of positions in the past has been that the risk, the cost benefit analysis. As I'm always doing cost benefit analysis of any situation. I'm like, okay, what should I do, this or that? Okay, how much is gonna, benefit me? What's the potential downfall of that? And so I'm constantly doing that calculation in my mind when we're talking certain things. And so I think that's something also that for me comes up from time to time, but I think that I will just be sitting back and curious to see where this takes you, because you evidently have a great panel, or at least some great people who are really giving you food for thought to say, hey, here's an idea. What do you want to do with it?
Yeah, it was when and I love the fact that firsthand, your type A personality, we're similar that way, and that's why we get along so well. But then I think that he dug a little bit deeper as I responded to him. No, because he knows that he can be honest with me, but the way he framed it and just said, this is something you can only figure out, and you need to think about it and come up with it. And so I will definitely get the book and try to understand it, because I do feel like, I think the hardest thing for me would be, and it will go against everything I want to do and the way I want to live my life, is that if I'm not being honest with myself, because then at the end of my life, all I will have is my own regret. And I have nobody else to hold accountable for that, because I convinced myself that this was the right thing to do when it wasn't the right thing for me. And then I will feel like, boy, I should have known better. I should have worked harder, and I should not have. Because I do feel like, as women and potentially women of color, and I don't know, being the middle child, we can put anything you want into it, which all explains my life, which is that I was raised to be a pleaser. I was raised to be the peacemaker. I was raised to be the hero child. I was raised to do everything, quote unquote. And there are sacrifices I made to do that. There are mistakes I made that I know were not the right decision for me now in hindsight. but I don't want to be 80 years old and feel like that's still going on. I feel like at some point we have to graduate to adulthood and we have to individuate from our families and our family of origin, our parents, and we have to be able to take responsibility for who we are and accept living on life's terms with life, right? And so I feel like that's the other worry or fear that I have is what if I would rather know now that I've been dishonest with myself than another 25 years from now, because that time is precious for me. And I feel like I have to start living my life authentically today. And I thought I've been doing that all this time. And if I haven't, then I feel like I need to shore that up and get honest and figure out what that next phase of my life looks like. And that's where I'm at right now with this. Okay, there is nothing more than fear that you have to be fearful of. And so only truth can come from exploring yourself and with the right intent, right? The intent is to make myself a better person that I can live without regret and be proud of who I am when I evaluate my whole life. And so I feel it'll be okay. That's where I am today after I've sat with the advice that my panel has given me for the last several days. And I feel like I'm in such a better place than I was when I first reached out to you, Alyssa. And I'm happy to have made that progress because it does feel so much better on this side than where I was. So I do appreciate you taking the time to help me think through this and share my story and give me some insight, even though it definitely feels there weren't immediate things that came to your mind that you could relate to, which is a wonderful place to be, and congratulate you on that. But I also feel like I did get good feedback from you when I reached out to you a couple days ago and other people, and I'm in a much better place. And I just hope that there are other people out there in our listener group that can benefit from this conversation and that there's another person, because every person I talked to said, you know what, we all get there one day. Like it might be a fleeting moment. It might be a longer period of time for me, but that we always have some self-doubt. How quickly you can get out of that is really, I think, a sign of where you're at with that particular issue in your life. And so I feel like I've made some strides, but I do appreciate your comment and you willing to let me talk about this because it was something that felt very relevant to me for a couple days. And I also don't like being the person who's jealous of somebody else. I'm not that person. I really don't want to be that person and definitely don't want to start at the age of 56 because that's not a good place to be. So any other thoughts before we wrap this up? And I'll just let you close it out.
None from me. I think that I just want to take a moment to say I appreciate you being, I think a lot of times we have these vulnerable moments on this podcast, and that's the whole premise to open up and have hard conversations and to start that dialogue with either those people around you. And so I appreciate your vulnerability and bringing this as a topic. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to join us in our Facebook group, the Deconstructed Woman podcast. We also would love to hear voice messages, or you can email us. We'll have those in the show notes for you. But we really welcome the feedback. We are really growing this podcast, looking for ideas and topics and things. And we just get a plethora of responses on a week-to-week basis. And it's so exciting to hear from other people, hear that this benefited them in some way. And so if this is the first time you're listening in, welcome. Again, we'd love for you to join our community and continue these conversations. And if you've been listening all along, thank you for doing so. Make sure to leave us a review or let us know how we're doing. And we hope to hear from you soon. Until next time, we'll talk then.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.